So if anybody wants to remain anonymous, you've got the option of turning off your camera, and you've also got the option of changing your name to something anonymous if you don't want anybody to know you're here. But thank you for coming, everybody. And what I'm going to do is do a brief presentation on the Great British Insulation Scheme and the various names that it's known by, and what we can expect from it. Okay. And there'll be loads of time for questions. You may already be receiving offers from energy companies and installers offering you various measures for your home, but it's important that the starting point is what you want and need for your home. And so, as I always say, when you're deciding what you want and need for your home, then a good place to start is the energy saving hierarchy, which tells us that we should start by using less energy, reduce demand, cut unnecessary use. Then we should use energy efficiently, controlling the rate at which we use energy. And then we've done those things, we should use lower carbon energy, energy from low carbon and renewable sources. And that's the order in which people should ideally do things in their homes. Now, of course, you won't necessarily be offered measures in that order. And so at the moment, in the early days of Eco, a lot of people are being offered solar. Solar is a good thing, but sometimes it's not always the first measure that you should do, and so you should really be looking to the top of the energy hierarchy before you do things like solar, but more on what we can expect in terms of solar in a minute. Oops, no, you're not supposed to say that. Right, okay, so thinking about how heat is lost from a home. What I'm going to launch in a minute is a quiz, and some of you, this will be revision to some of you, but the quiz is, how is heat lost from a typical semi-detached home? So any second now, you should see a poll appear on your screen.
Okay.
And the question is, how is most heat lost from a typical semi-detached house? And you've got a number of choices: floor, windows, walls, doors, ventilation and drafts, thermal bridging, and you can choose one. Okay, most of you have participated. I don't think I'm allowed to, but so I'm going to give you 10 seconds and then I'm going to close the poll.
Bless you.
Okay, so you should now see the results of the poll. So 50% of you said walls, 25% of you said ventilation and drafts, 10% of you said walls. No, sorry, we've done that. Yeah, 25% of you said ventilation and drafts, 20% of you said windows, and a small number said floor. So I'm now going to show you the answers. In a typical semi-detached house, most heat is lost through the walls, and most of you got that, so well done. Now, and the next most important things are floor, ventilation and drafts. So well done to anybody that said ventilation and drafts. It's not the top answer, but you are thinking on the right lines by understanding the importance of ventilation and draft. And obviously ventilation is necessary in a house, but older forms of ventilation can also lose heat. But older homes have, older homes will invariably have drafts and poor air tightness, where building components meet, and will lose heat through that. These figures are from the AECB, the Association of Environmentally Conscious Building. You will see other versions of this, but invariably the walls are always the top answer. Incidentally, over the years, the amount of heat lost through the roof has gone down, and that's because most roofs have got some kind of insulation now, either loft insulation or room in roof insulation. But what this means is that if you're thinking of heat loss through your home, then the priority for almost everybody is the walls. This is up for a semi-detached house. If it was a detached house, then the heat loss through the walls would be a bit higher than 48. If it's a mid-terrace, then it would be lower than 48. If it's a flat, it's lower than 48. But even in a mid-terrace or a flat, walls are still the biggest source of heat loss. So when you're thinking about insulation for your home, think about those things. And you'll also see on this house, you've got dwarf walls under bay windows. Don't forget about those. These windows, these bits of dwarf wall under the first floor bay window, they might not even be made of brick. In London, they would be made of brick. So we've got some people here from London. Hello, Ruth and Peter. Where you live in Ilford, those bay window dwarf walls are usually made of brick, but here in Birmingham, they're typically made of timber frame and plasterboard on the inside, and some kind of tiles on the outside, and they tend to lose a lot of heat. So don't forget about those. So there are 3 types of scheme out there at the moment. The first one is Eco4. And Eco4 is a means tested scheme, and it's aimed at people on low incomes. The threshold is about 31,000, although in some areas proxy indicators are used. So there are some areas of Birmingham that have been declared eligible, and so they don't, because the whole neighbourhood is considered to be on a low income. And so there is some kind of low income test, either based on geography or household income. But there is also an EPC test. So homes with an energy performance certificate of D or below will qualify if they're owner occupiers. Private rented tend to be E, or you need to be E or below. I'm conscious of the fact that there is one person on this call who works for an energy company in their day job, and Jazz, you might want to say something later as well. And we've also got Natalie Rush here from 6 Mile Insulation, who has experience of these type of schemes. And Natalie, feel free to come in later. Shaz, you're just rejoining us. Given that you work for an energy company during your day job, you may have something to say in a personal capacity in a bit, and feel free to do so. So GBIS is, not all energy companies are calling it this, but what is broadly known as GBIS, the Great British Insulation Scheme, is not means tested. It is not for people on low incomes. It's for people who are not in receipt of benefits, people who are not in areas of multiple disadvantage, and people whose household income is well over £31,000 a year. There is still an EPC qualification, so it's for D or below, and there is also a council tax band qualification, so you need to have a council tax band of A to D. So the intention with Great British Insulation Scheme is it's available to the broadest group of people. Now, whereas Eco4, the intention is that it will be 100% funded for people who are unable to afford measures themselves. Great British Insulation Scheme will not be fully funded. There will be a householder contribution. And I would not expect the funded contribution to be more than 50%. And I think people will get various different offers from different utility companies. This is a carbon, these schemes have a carbon trading mechanism behind them. And so the amount that you would be expected to pay towards it will vary, but I would not expect you to get more than 50% towards the cost of the measure. The other type of funding that is available at the moment, and this has actually been around for a couple of years now, is something called Ecoflex, and this is for vulnerable people who don't qualify for Eco4. By vulnerable, that it's a medical condition that is related to cold and damp living conditions. So Ecoflex is a fuel poverty scheme, and it's a different, all these schemes are statutory obligations on the utility companies, but whereas Eco and GBIS are carbon saving obligations, Ecoflex is primarily a fuel poverty obligation, and because it's about making a home healthier, then there is a certain amount of flexibility and discretion that local authorities have. So the passport to that is to get a letter from an NHS professional saying this person has such and such a medical condition and would benefit from having a warmer home. And that is and you need that and one other piece of evidence. But that is a scheme that is aimed at people who are suffering from cold and damp related medical conditions. So what I did about a week ago is looked at the energy companies that are obliged to deliver eco. Sorry about this, but my screen's gone a bit weird. So I looked at the energy companies that are obliged to deliver eco. I hope you can you still see the?
Yes.
Right. Okay. You might have lost the screen for a minute then, but it's back on. So all these companies that are listed on the left have an obligation to deliver. At the moment, there are only 3 energy companies that have announced an offer on non-means tested schemes. In other words, things that are universally available for which there is not a means test. Those companies are British Gas. They're calling it the Great British Insulation Scheme. E.ON are calling it Green Homes Funding. OVO have got a scheme. I don't think it's got a name. And the others are either saying, watch this space, or they're not saying anything at all. But obviously British Gas and E.ON are the biggies, and so are OVO, to be fair. So it's not surprising that they have gone earliest. But other people, Octopus Energy, for example, have got a statement on their website saying we're working on it, and that they will do it. They're just not in a rush to be first. And in terms of what measures will be available, British Gas are saying that most likely it will be cavity wall insulation. And so there is no indication that British Gas are going to do a wide range of measures. They're basically saying the priority for us is cavity wall insulation because it's easiest for them. And so they appear to be ruling out solid wall insulation, which is bad news for a lot of people, particularly in places like Birmingham, where we have a lot of solid walls, and so that is a problem. E.ON, their website suggests that all insulation measures will be included, including cavity wall insulation, loft insulation, solid wall insulation, and underfloor insulation. And that is, and I've, meetings that I've attended in Birmingham at which E.ON have been present, suggests that that's what they intend to do. And that's obviously good news for people with solid walls. EDF, their website is indicating that they're basically going to focus on cavity and loft insulation and therefore not solid walls. OVO's website is not clear at all about what measures they will offer. So Energy, who are quite a small energy company, they have said that they're not ready to launch, but they're basically saying that when they do, it will be all insulation measures. I think it's worth noting that whereas some of the biggest some suppliers will prioritize their customers, i.e. people that buy gas and electricity off them. And yeah, Shaz, I'd be, in a minute, well, I'll come back to you and ask you to clarify E.ON's position. So some energy companies will prioritize people who buy gas and electricity off them. Some energy companies will have their offer open to anybody. Some of the smaller energy companies will probably outsource their offer, and it's worth remembering that installers can also be a channel for the funding, and so installers can make an offer. And we've got Natalie from Six Star who I'll bring in a minute. But there are already solar installers making an offer, and there are insulation installers making an offer, putting leaflets through people's doors. Shaz, have you got anything to add about it? And what I'll come on to is I'll come on to the means tested schemes in a minute, because that's particularly relevant to Birmingham. But Shaz, have you got anything to say about E.ON position at this point?
Yeah, I am an E.ON employee, so there is a conflict there that I should recognise. But basically, in terms of green homes funding, that's mostly about eco. So, for example, that Birmingham scheme mentions is an Eco4 scheme. What you'll tend to find is that GBIS is focused more on loft and cavity. I read the consultation of it from the government like the other week, and it's a single measure scheme where they focus on loft or cavity. But if you do live in Birmingham, there's going to be a massive Eco4 scheme, and it's not just E.ON. There's loads of different partners, so different areas will have different focuses. So if you do live in Birmingham, keep your eye out, because there'll definitely be plenty of opportunities for these schemes, and not just E.ON. There's loads of different partners, because the council's really behind, because they should have done this 5 years ago, but I'm only doing it now.
So do you think that E.ON will offer solid wall insulation to non-means tested customers?
Yes, but only if you're in the right place at the right time. So as part of Eco4, there's this thing called infill. So I don't know the exact numbers, but say there's an Eco4 street and there's 10 houses being done. If 8 of them qualify and 2 of them don't, there's a percentage. It might be like 20%, maybe. Don't quote me on that, but there's definitely a percentage of houses that can be done on an infill. So if you're in the middle, then of two houses that are being done, then you don't qualify, then you potentially that can still happen. But yeah, just with GBIS, it's the loft and the cavities, the focus on it. That's from the government. Basically, the government have been made because the government have been under a lot of pressure to do something. They're doing something. They're just doing it in the cheapest way they can. So,
Yeah.
but there you go. But yeah, keep your eyes out. Loads of different companies that will be doing lots of things around the West Midlands. There's similar stuff going on in Coventry and Wolverhampton as well. So there's lots of potential out there.
Okay, thanks. Now, oops. So means tested schemes. This is what is out there about means tested schemes, and what Shaz has already said about a bit of this. But so British Gas are offering a means tested scheme which they call Eco4. They're saying it's mostly cavity wall insulation. E.ON have a means tested scheme that is now available. They're calling it Green Homes Funding. There is also the partnership between E.ON and Birmingham City Council, targeting homes in Birmingham, and energy companies will have partnerships with other local authorities. So you can expect Dudley, Wolverhampton, Solihull to have similar partnerships with energy companies, which might be E.ON, it might be British Gas, it might be OVO. So OVO have a means tested scheme. So Energy So Energy don't, but Utilita do have a means tested scheme. And by the way, I will circulate this spreadsheet afterwards, because then it's got all the links to the various websites. Now, in terms of Birmingham, so there is this partnership between E.ON and Birmingham City Council aimed at low-income households. And at the moment, they are targeting East Birmingham, including Borstal Heath, Tyseley, Acots Green, Hay Mills. And the infill scheme that Shaz mentioned, I think, I would expect that to be available in those areas. And therefore, those are the kind of circumstances where solid wall insulation might be available. But what all this is pointing to is that there is not an easy route to solid wall insulation under any of these schemes, which is disappointing for people that have got solid walls. So if you're in East Birmingham and qualified for the means tested scheme, you can apply now. If you're in other parts of Birmingham, there is theoretically a waiting list, but when you click on the link, the waiting list isn't open. So it's all as clear as mud, really. And this is not the kind of generally available funding scheme that we need. And particularly for people with solid walls. So for means tested schemes, there are certain geographical areas where everybody qualifies because indices of multiple deprivation apply, but otherwise individual households that are in receipt of these that are eligible through these routes will qualify for the means tested bit of Eco4. The other thing, the other scheme that's open at the moment, and it's been open previously, is Ecoflex. And again, Birmingham City Council have got this, and other local authorities will have this. And Ecoflex, as I mentioned earlier, is aimed at households where somebody has a chronic illness that is related to cold and damp. And it's called Ecoflex because local authorities have a degree of discretion about who's eligible, and the qualification for it is essentially a letter from a health professional saying this person suffers from a cold and damp related medical condition and would benefit from a warmer home. This bit of Eco is available, is managed by Agility Eco on behalf of Birmingham City Council, and at the moment the path to referrals is to email that email address. and because there is a degree of flexibility, then there is no, if somebody's home is cold and damp, there is no point giving them solar. You know, a home that is cold and damp needs insulation, and so those of you that are working with vulnerable people, thinking of those people rather than yourselves, if you're working with vulnerable people in any way that qualify for Ecoflex, then it might be worth referring them, and that might be their best bet. So Eco is open for business, but not really in the way that people need. And therefore, those of you, if you need loft or cavity wall insulation, you've got a good chance of getting it. If you need solid wall insulation, then it's going to be hard work, and you've got to, as Chaz said, you've got to be in the right place at the right time. So in terms of what else you can do, improved air tightness. I mean, we saw in the quiz that a lot of heat is lost through ventilation and drafts, and a lot of older homes have poor air tightness, you know, around skirting boards and so on and so forth, and would benefit from better air tightness. Now, Eco won't fund air tightness because better air tightness involves things like airtight membranes, air tightness tapes, and so on and so forth, which aren't expensive. You can get from a DIY store and do it yourself. So it's not available under Eco, but it's something that people can do themselves for not an enormous amount of money. The other thing is intelligent heating controls, which are now becoming far more widespread, and for a lot of people will be an improvement on what they've got. And I think what I've found over the past sort of 12 months or so is that because the way people use their homes is changing because of COVID and home working and evolving caring responsibilities, and therefore, you know, older style heating controls don't really give you the level of control that you need. And so intelligent heating controls such as Tado or Google Nest give people more control, and can save you energy. And obviously the other things you can do are correctly sized designed heat pumps and correctly sized solar panels, with the emphasis on correctly designed and correctly sized, because a badly designed heat pump or incorrectly sized solar panels is not the best use of your money. There is funding available for domestic heat pumps through the boiler upgrade scheme. So if you're replacing a gas boiler or an oil boiler with a heat pump, then you qualify for up to £5,000 through the boiler upgrade scheme. This is in the form of a voucher to the installer, and the installer applies for this on your behalf. And that scheme is underspent. So if you're considering a heat pump, then you know the funding is there. What is now starting to happen is that eco funding is starting to be used. Eco funding is starting to be used for solar, and so you're starting to get subsidised offers of solar and batteries. And I've looked at the maths on some of the schemes, and yes, it is decent value for money. What I would say is that if you get offered subsidised solar at the moment, then check out the installer's trading history. If they've only been in business for 6 months, then they might not be around very long after the funding has gone, and therefore you won't get aftercare if you need it. And check out their customer reviews on Google or Trustpilot. So be wary of buying solar panels from new starts. It's best to use an established company for solar. So Marta's asking a question: is the boiler upgrade scheme means tested? No, it isn't. Thanks, Nadia. Good to see you. So business boiler upgrade scheme is not means tested. it's available to anybody irrespective of their household income. And to be honest, most of it goes to able to pay households, because it's not 100% grant. You know, you will need to find some of the cost of a heat pump yourself, and therefore it's of little value to people on low incomes. And it is only available through registered installers, and that is only right and proper, because heat pumps are installing a heat pump is a very skilled measure, and it's only right that the funding can only be accessed through registered installers. I often get asked for help by people who've had heat pumps installed badly by people who aren't properly qualified, and the difference between a properly installed heat pump and a badly installed heat pump is absolutely night and day. Yeah, okay. So if a lot of you have already done this, but it's a good idea to get impartial energy advice before you do anything to your home. Thanks to those of you who already done this. Other advisors are available, but I obviously am available, and here are a couple of Trustpilot reviews which I quite like. If you need advice from me, then do get in touch. So that's the end of the slides. Are there any questions?
I was just wondering, the push in Birmingham at the moment, is it to do with the fact that they may be behind? Someone just mentioned that they should have done this 5 years ago and they haven't. Is that the reason, or is it because the council's just putting more effort into this now?
I think what you've got in Birmingham at the moment is a group of people working for the City Council Net Zero team who are actually really good. And so they're making a lot of progress. And I think it's fair to say that Birmingham has lagged behind some of the local authorities for a few years. So, you know, it's good to see Birmingham City Council making progress on this. But it's also important to notice that other local authorities, you know, Solihull, Wolverhampton, Dudley, Coventry will all have similar schemes. But what worries me is that what we've seen on previous schemes is that there is not a whole house approach, and what people are being offered is individual measures that are not part of a long-term plan for the home. You know, what every home in Britain needs is a long-term retrofit plan. It's as simple as that. And you know, some of you have already got one. You know, there are people on this call that have been developing a long-term retrofit plan for their homes on their own, off their own bat for 10 years. There are some people who've had advice from me. There are some people who've had advice from others. But, you know, that's a handful of people in the whole of Birmingham. If we want to get Birmingham anywhere near net zero, then we need a whole house plan for every house in Birmingham. And that needs to be the starting point. We can't, it's wrong to just randomly throw measures at people just because it's the cheapest thing for an energy company to deliver. And so there will be occasions where a house is offered a measure that is not in the householder's best interests. And if I'm advising that householder, I will say to them, this is not in your best interests. And you should either refuse it or look elsewhere. But yeah, that is the central government's fault for not adopting a whole house approach to eco. I mean, in about 6 years ago, the government commissioned a review of retrofit schemes called, I think it was called Every Home Matters. And they said, you know, these are the mistakes that have been made in the past. This is what we should do in the future, a whole house approach, a long-term approach. And that seems to be being ignored on eco. And so, you know, people won't always get what they need.
Could I ask a question about
Yeah.
solid wall insulation, Phil? It's Alistair Jackson speaking. I'm just trying to understand why the costs of solid wall insulation are so comparatively high. Is it materials? Is it the amount of labour entailed? And if it's materials, is there any sign of costs of materials falling as the amount of this type of work is hopefully increasing?
Yeah, thanks for that, Alistair. I'm just going to briefly answer a question that Marta put in the chat. Yes, the rules will essentially be the same across the country. Alistair, what I've just put in the chat, and some of you might have comments about this, what I've just put in the chat are some figures based upon my recent experience. And so as a ballpark figure, you can expect to pay £281 a square metre for external wall insulation. And 170 for internal, underfloor insulation 77. Obviously they will vary. Now there is inflation in the construction industry. There is particularly high inflation in energy efficient products and services. And there are a number of reasons for that. And yes, Brexit is one of them. But the reality is that during the first couple of years of coronavirus, people stopped making insulation products or slowed down the manufacture of insulation products to such an extent that now that demand for insulation has now risen massively because of individual householders looking for it, but also because of government schemes like the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund. And so, and that puts upward pressure on prices. So hello, Jamie, good to see you. And yes, there'll be a recording of this, which I'll circulate in the next couple of days. You've got, I always use this term about the insulation industry. You've got essentially market failure. You've got a market that is years behind, where you've got a product that not everybody believes that they need, and that those that do want it find that it's difficult to find a decent installer. You've got stop-start government schemes that makes it difficult for the supply chain. If you're an installer, it makes it difficult to plan ahead because you don't know what the future holds.
Yeah.
And all those things lead to a situation where it's difficult to get a decent installer, and there's uncertainty over pricing. I think for those people that can afford to do this without grant funding, that is the easiest option. But if you need grant funding, then it's hard work, and there is no easy way. There is no easy way to do this. And Christine, thanks for this. Do you have a link to examples of internal wall insulation for solid homes? I mean, we've highlighted this through Birmingham Green Doors. So if you go into birminghamgreendoors.co.uk, there are two. The next Birmingham Green Doors event, which will be in September, for which tickets are not actually on sale officially yet. There is a video there of the householder Ben talking about, and he had internal wall insulation and external. And there is also the last event at Maggie and Dave's house in Erdington, which some of you attended. Alex was there, and they had some internal wall insulation, and they talk about it in their video. I think the best way to see internal wall insulation is, if you're not familiar with it, Birmingham Green Doors is there to highlight these things, and there will be a number of Birmingham Green Doors events over the next few months, which obviously I'll email you all about. Yeah, it's not easy.
quite
Okay.
disappointing hearing you say that those that might be doing the GBIS scheme are looking at cavity wall and loft insulation. You know, I mean, I've done everything I can to my old it's a very early 1930s semi, single brick, you know, solid, and we are the first house up a hill, and I'm exposed on 3 sides. My loft's well insulated, you know, we've got good flooring. It's just those external walls are so cold to the touch. But yeah, I am interested to have a look, so I will look at the Birmingham green doors.
Yeah, we are. Thanks, thanks, Christian. We are still way away from a mass program of solid wall insulation for private sector households. Some housing associations are doing it, but we're a long way away from a mass program for private sector households, and therefore we are still at the stage of willful individuals. And so there are people in this room that I know have done solid wall insulation, but it's been a bit of a battle to do it, and generally speaking, they've had to do it with their own money rather than with external funding. But
Bill,
thanks for joining us, Christine. Yeah,
sorry, I was just wondering, the Friends of the Earth are running a campaign called United for Warm Homes, supported by a number of charities. What do you think of the campaign, in that a realistic outcome for a campaign like that?
well, okay. I mean, I think that things are going backwards on this, because it looks as if the government is going to retreat from minimum energy performance standards. I mean, Chris Crean is the policy expert in this meeting rather than me, so I'd be interested to hear what from Chris about this. I think, I mean, this government is not the type of government to favour an individual measure. I think their approach, this government's approach, to the extent that it has an approach, is based upon improving energy performance certificate ratings as a proxy for energy efficiency. And there are pros and cons to that. But it is quite limited. I mean, my view is that in terms of the target that we need for households is to do with energy use per square meter. And because an energy use per square meter target gives us progress both in warmth and carbon. And I think if targets were set for that, then that would be a lot of progress. Right, starting to get questions and hands up. Jamie, is it effective to paint your house white to reflect heat for summer overheated? Yes, it is. However, there is a methodology. So there is a methodology for risk assessing a home for overheating. So I think the starting point is to look at what are the risk factors in a house overheating, and what are the mitigation measures for that. And so mitigation measures can include stuff like ventilation, shading, blinds, and so on and so forth. So yeah, painting a house white is one measure, but it's not the only one. Marta, you're absolutely correct about EPCs. EPCs are not that brilliant. Shaz, you've got your hand up, and Natalie, I would like to bring you in if you're ready to say a few words. Shaz first.
Yeah, just to add a bit of information on some of the other questions. So one of the key drivers of the price increases in external wall insulation is that standards are now much higher than they used to be. So when I started working in the industry, 10 years ago, you could externally wall and insulate a house for less than £5 grand if it's a mid-terrace. And now that same house, if you're going to abide by the standards you need to in the funding schemes, that same house could cost 20 grand. Basically, there were things you used to be able to do, which I won't go into the details, but you could, but there are lots of things that you used to be able to do you can't do anymore, and that's not going to change. The other point about the campaigning is that this government is only focused at the moment is on inflation, and that's partly why GBiz is so lightweight. But this maybe inflation is the key forefront of the government of today, but there'll be a different government maybe soon, and therefore the lobbying of whoever that government may or may not be is still very, very important. And so whilst we have a very short-sighted government now, lobbying and telling your MP and your councillors that insulation should be at the foremost of energy reduction strategies that this country should have is very, very important. So you should still do that anyway, even if this government doesn't take it as seriously as you'd like. Cheers.
Thanks, Chaz. Natalie, are you would you like to say a few words?
Yeah, actually that is a really good point, because it's really disappointing. It costs a fortune to insulate a house properly, and if you're a tenant you might get something, but effectively a lot of us have got to fork out for this ourselves, and it's very, very expensive, and the return on investment when last calculated could be as much as 20 years. So quick wins are probably draft proofing and stuff like that, but you've just made a really good point there about lobbying, because unless we kind of say anything, no one's going to hear us, basically. There's not enough funding out there to help most of us insulate our old homes properly.
Yeah,
I should explain, I've got an insulation company, so if anyone wants to fire any questions, feel free.
and are you expecting to be part of Eco at some stage?
Yes, we've kind of avoided it in the past because it's been about throwing in gas boilers and insulating someone's loft as quickly as possible, or under the floor or something like that. But it could be changing. Obviously gas boilers will be a thing of the past, so funding those is going to end. Eco is not the only funding stream though anymore. I mean, it has been, and there's been bits and bobs, but there are other more stable funding streams out there now that are also probably worth focusing on for my company.
Thanks, Natalie.
Knock this down from the wall. Okay. Yeah, really sorry. And the glass broke, so I threw it again. But yeah, really sorry.
I think it was
Okay, all right. I'll tell Karen when she comes back up. She's down painting at the moment. Really sorry about that. That's quite all right.
Right, Chris Martin, you had your hand up.
Yes, I mean, sometimes we get asked by, sort of a novice on insulation is, where do I start? And the advice and there's a whole framework which emerged from the citizens panel, which was held. Harriet was on it about 6 or 9 months ago, which starts with make sure you've got an EPC, look at the suggestions in the EPC, and that seems John Nightingale, I think, is here, might want to comment on it, but is that all being thought of put to pasture, or it does seem to provide a quite a sound framework for people who want to do something but don't know where to start.
I think that if there is I think the first thing about EPCs is it valid, is it current, and is it accurate? I think that 90% of EPCs are accurate. In my experience, about 10% are inaccurate. EPCs are not always current, but if you've got a reasonably recent an accurate EPC, then there is some information in it. However, that information is not presented in a format that can be readily used by a typical householder. And that's one of the reasons why most people don't really take any notice of it. I mean, I think the data in EPCs has the potential to be used, but not, and is of use to an expert, but it is not of use in the format that it's presented to a householder. It tells you, so an EPC tells you what you should do. It doesn't tell you how you should do it. It doesn't tell you why you should do it. It doesn't tell you when you should do it. So a genuine whole house retrofit plan will not only tell you what to do, it'll tell you how to do it, and why this is the right measure and is the priority. And it also talks about when you should do it, because the way householders look at their home is they're not thinking they are thinking what can I do now, but householders invariably think about the long-term future of their home. So they're not just thinking what can I do in the next, they're thinking what can I do in 5 years and 10 years time. And so there's only a limited amount you can do with EPCs. The other thing about EPCs is there are gaps in it. And so, you know, an EPC will never advise you to insulate a sloping ceiling. It will never advise you to insulate the flat roof of a bay window. It will never advise you to insulate the dwarf wall of a bay window. It will never advise you on air tightness. So there are, I mean, I think people have been lobbying for years for EPCs to be overhauled, and I absolutely support that. But yeah, some EPCs are of use, but they are of very limited use. They don't go far enough, and you know, and so yeah, they're a blunt instrument, really. They're essentially a compliance measure, and they're of limited use for households. So sorry to disagree on that, but I do have quite strong views on EPCs, and I know other people here do. For and against. Anybody else? We've got about 5 minutes. I hope I haven't depressed you all too much.
I had a question. My house has got like on the first floor, it's just like a normal house, and then on the second floor, the ceiling slopes inwards, which you just kind of talked about, I guess. The only way I can see to actually insulate it is actually to either take the panels off take the tiles off the roof and insulate it from the outside, or get something that I don't know, some sort of loose material that would go from, because the sloping doesn't start right at the bottom of the room. It starts like halfway up the wall. Yeah. And so there's like this gap, and like, for example, when it snows, you can really see it because that's like the snow melts there, whereas where the insulation in the loft is, you can see it's quite good there because it doesn't melt. Would you have any advice on what the best way forward with that would be?
Yeah, so a sloping ceiling will usually have a worse energy performance than a conventional wall or a roof. And so, you know, even if the walls are insulated and the roof is insulated, then heat will escape through the sloping ceiling. I mean, taking off the tiles would be quite disruptive. The normal way to insulate it is with internal wall insulation. And Natalie, I know I believe you've done this. But yeah, Alistair, I know you're looking at this as well, but internal wall insulation, and generally to a greater thickness than you would normally do, because the heat loss through there is so much greater. But yeah, internal wall insulation or even thermal plasterboard is the sort of usual way to address that.
Okay, so kind of treat it like it's kind of like a loft in itself. The side sections where it's like a void.
So there is a void. So
Yeah,
okay.
so the roof goes all the way down to the first floor, and then between the rooms and the roof, there's like this triangle sort of void area that's a bit like a loft, but obviously it's not actually the loft.
No. Okay, I mean, without seeing it, I mean, what I'm starting to think about now is if there is a void, is it safe to insulate because air will need to circulate in it? Whereas internal wall insulation on the underside of the slope seems to me to be safer, but I wouldn't really commit to it without seeing it.
Right. Okay.
I think
Yeah.
I think he's talking about the dwarf wall, Phil, that you mentioned earlier, where there would be, if you can insulate the wall with the same material as you're insulating the sloping part, that's normally how you do it. So you always have to maintain the void behind it because you'll need to do that. So for example, if you wanted to do a really proper job of that sloping ceiling, you take down the plasterboard, build out the ceiling rafters so you could get 140 millimeters of a rigid insulation board in there, and then you'd go over the top with an insulated plasterboard. But a lot of people don't have the head height that they can lose in a situation like that, and you'd use the same methodology on the dwarf wall that's kind of underneath it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, right. We said we'd finish at 8 o'clock, so I'm going to bring in John Nightingale.
Yes, if somebody wants to have a survey done, first of all, what is the actual name, technical name of this survey? And secondly, obviously we can go to yourself, but supposing somebody's in another part of the country, what sort of person should they be looking for? What sort of qualification? What's the job description of somebody who can do a qualified survey?
Well, I mean, there is not really universal provision. I mean, there are a number of routes to advice. Impartial advice that is independent of an engine company or an installer. Then there are sole traders like me. There are non-profit organisations like Community Energy Birmingham, South and East London Community Energy, but they don't all offer the same thing, and they don't all call it the same thing. But you know, generally speaking, you know, what I would do, like if you were in like John O'Groats, for example, I would Google impartial energy advice in John O'Groats and see what comes up, and there may or may not be somebody there. I mean, if you Google impartial energy advice in Birmingham, then I'll be on there somewhere, and there are one or two other people. So it varies. I mean, I think the AECB member directory is a good place to start.
Okay, what do those initials mean?
Association of Environmentally Conscious Building. So if you go on the AECB website and look at if you just Google AECB, I'll put it in the chat, then you click on member directory, it will have that is a good place to start in terms of who there is. Sole traders, small businesses, architectural practices that give independent energy advice. That is a good place to start. But when you look at the map, you'll see that it's very patchy. You know, there are some parts of the country where you'll find somebody, and there are some parts of the country where you won't. In terms of qualifications, you know, again, if you look on the AECB website, it displays people's qualifications, and AECB only accepts people that are qualified through it. Retrofit coordinator is the other sort of qualification routes, but yeah, it's patchy around the country, you know, because there is certainly a lack of people who who have any experience at delivering impartial energy advice. I mean, I am currently mentoring a couple of people, because, you know, and I hope that they will become energy advisors, and they might end up being collaborators of mine. They might end up being competitors, but the bottom line is we need more people that can give impartial energy advice.
Thank you, Phil.
Right. Unless anybody, thank you, John. Unless anybody's got any burning question, because it's 8 o'clock, I will close the meeting. And what I will do probably tomorrow, I will circulate the recording and the spreadsheet with the details of the schemes. So good luck to you all with negotiating the minefield that is making your homes more energy efficient, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Bye.
Thanks, Phil. See you.
Thank you.